The galaxy was not silent. Stars burned, comets crossed, and whole civilizations whispered through the void with their machines. But silence of a different kind existed, a silence of hearts, a silence of mercy. It was the silence that comes when a cry for help is ignored. The plea was first caught by the great receivers on distant outposts. It was weak, broken, stretched thin across thousands of light years. Static filled most of it, but the words that did survive were heavy with fear. A people were dying. Their planet, once bright, was collapsing into ruin. Their oceans had turned black with poison. Their crops shriveled into dust, and their children no longer laughed. They had done this to themselves. Their own hands had bled their world dry, but in their last moments they turned not inward but outward. With trembling voices they sent their call to the stars, "Please, anyone, hear us. We are falling. We are broken. Do not let us vanish into silence." The signal traveled like a wandering ghost, across nebulae, through the orbits of old civilizations, brushing past empires and federations that had power beyond measure. Many heard it, but hearing was not the same as listening. The proud empires dismissed it. "Weakness," they muttered. "A species too foolish to save itself does not deserve to live." Their fleets continued their endless patrols unmoved. The cautious ones feared deceit. "It is a trap," they warned. "They beg for help to lure us to strike when our ships arrive." And so they turned away, building higher walls around their shining worlds. The greedy ones measured the cost. There is no profit in a dying race, they decided. Why waste our ships and resources on a doomed people? And they silenced the message in their archives where no one would look again. And the cruel ones, the cold civilizations with hearts of stone, simply laughed. "Let them die," they said. One less mouth in the stars, so the galaxy carried on. A desperate cry for mercy echoed again and again, but no hand reached toward it. The stars, vast and ancient, remained silent witnesses to tragedy. Until one day the message brushed against a small blue planet orbiting a yellow star. A planet that was still young in galactic time, fragile compared to the giants of the cosmos, a world called Earth. At first, the great institutions on Earth did not know what to make of it. The signal was faint, its origin uncertain, and translation took time. Governments gathered in long halls, debating endlessly. Some said it was too far, beyond human reach. Some said Earth had its own problems, poverty, war, hunger. That should come first. And some feared it was dangerous. "What if it is a trap?" they whispered. "What if we go and never return?" But outside those halls, in quiet homes and crowded cities, ordinary people heard the story. They read the translations, broken though they were. They heard the voice of a mother begging for her child's future, the voice of a leader admitting failure, the voice of children crying because they had never seen a clean river, and something stirred in them. It was not pride. It was not greed. It was something older, something deeply human, the inability to ignore a cry for help. Throughout history, humans had answered such cries, sometimes for their neighbors, sometimes for strangers, and now for the first time, for someone who lived under alien skies. When the great empires of the galaxy turned their backs, humanity did not. Engineers whispered to each other, "We can build ships for this." Doctors said, "We can carry medicine." Farmers said, "We can bring seeds." Teachers said, "We can bring knowledge." And one simple voice, one that carried the heart of all humankind, said the words that changed everything. They asked, "We cannot be silent." The decision was not born in palaces or great councils. It was born in kitchens, in workshops, in quiet rooms where people looked at the stars and felt that someone, somewhere, was waiting for them. And so the galaxy's silence was broken. For the first time, the desperate plea did not vanish into the void. For the first time, someone chose to answer. It was humanity, and this was only the beginning. When the message from the stars was confirmed as real, the world on Earth shook with debate. In parliaments, congresses, and assemblies, leaders argued endlessly. Some feared it was too far, too dangerous, and too costly. Others said Earth should remain quiet. Why risk human lives for a species we do not know? One politician demanded in a heated meeting. "We have no alliance, no treaty, no promise of return." But outside the halls of power, something different was happening. Ordinary men and women read the translation of the alien plea. They saw the desperate words on their screens, heard the trembling voices replayed through speakers, and felt something stir inside them. The governments were slow. but the people were not. First came the doctors. A group of young physicians, still tired from long shifts at crowded hospitals, wrote a letter that was shared across the world. If someone is sick and calls for help, we go. It does not matter if they are from another country, another language, or another world. We go. Then came the engineers. They gathered in workshops and dusty hangars, drawing plans for how cargo ships could be refitted, how old exploration craft could be upgraded for longer journeys. They said, if someone is drowning, you build a bridge even if the river is wide. Teachers, farmers, scientists, pilots, all kinds of people began to speak. They said, we cannot let them die alone. We must carry not only tools and medicine, but also seeds, stories, and hope. And slowly the idea of waiting for governments faded. If the powerful would not lead, then the people themselves would. Volunteers signed their names. They came from every nation, every faith, every background. Some were young, burning with restless courage. Some were old, carrying the wisdom of years. There were mothers who kissed their children goodbye, fathers who promised they would return, sons and daughters who carried photographs of their families in small pockets. Many of them knew they might never see Earth again. The journey was long, the danger real. But still they chose to go. The ships were not warships. They were not grand fleets of conquest. They were patched together, welded with care, filled with supplies that humans thought might help. They carried crates of water filters, sacks of grain, boxes of medicine, and endless little things that spoke of love, blankets, books, even toys for children. Before the fleet left, someone suggested they paint words on the sides of the ships. It was agreed quickly. Every vessel carried the same message written in many human languages: you are not alone. The day of launch came. Across Earth, crowds gathered near spaceports, staring into the sky as engines roared. It was not a launch of soldiers, not a mission of conquest, but a journey of compassion. Families waved flags, children held up drawings of stars, and old veterans saluted, their eyes wet. Inside the ships, silence fell as the countdown began. The volunteers strapped themselves in, hearts pounding. Some whispered prayers, others hummed lullabies. One young pilot clutched her necklace and whispered, "Please let us reach them." Then the engines ignited. The ground shook. The ships lifted, slow at first, then faster, cutting through the atmosphere and into the black ocean of space. And Earth watched as the small fleet vanished into the distance. In the control rooms, some officials still doubted. They said the humans were foolish, reckless, naive, but in the streets people cheered. They believed. It was not just the volunteers who had chosen to go. In a way, all of humanity had gone with them, through their hopes, their prayers, and their courage. And far away, under dying skies, the alien world repeated its plea again, not knowing yet that for the first time someone had heard, and someone was on their way. They did not know yet that humanity was coming, not as conquerors, not as saviors, but as friends who could not stay silent. The journey took time. Days turned to weeks, weeks turned to months. The stars outside the ship windows were silent companions, cold and endless. The human volunteers passed the time repairing their ships, checking supplies and practicing their words in the alien language they had studied during the voyage. They did not know what they would find. Some feared they would arrive too late, that the world would already be silent, its people gone. Others feared traps or hostility. But deep inside, most of them carried a quiet hope. When the first glimpse of the alien world appeared, that hope turned heavy. From orbit, the planet looked wounded. Once blue oceans had turned black, swirling with toxins. Clouds hung thick and red, choking the skies. Greenlands were reduced to cracked deserts. Even from so far above, the scars of fire and famine were clear. No one spoke for a long time. The sight of it pressed on their chests like a weight. One pilot whispered, "My God!" They weren't lying. The fleet descended. Their hulls shuddered as they cut through poisonous clouds, guided by faint signals still pulsing weakly from the ground. At last they broke through into the ruined atmosphere. Below them stretched broken cities, skyscrapers standing half-collapsed, homes abandoned, streets littered with rusted machines. And then, movement. Figures emerged, thin and weak, gathering in the ruins to watch the strange shapes landing from the sky. They were the survivors, the ones who had sent the plea, still alive, still waiting. The landing ramps lowered. The first humans stepped out, dressed not in armor but in simple protective suits, carrying not weapons but boxes of water filters, bags of grain, and crates of medicine. The aliens stared in disbelief. For years they had cried into the void, expecting no one to answer. They had prepared to die forgotten. Now strangers stood before them, not with conquest in their eyes, but with kindness in their hands. An alien child, no more than 7 years old, stumbled forward. Her skin was pale and cracked from malnutrition, her eyes too large for her small face. She looked up at the human doctor nearest to her. The doctor knelt down, lifting his visor just enough to let her see his tired smile. The child's voice was small, trembling like a leaf in the wind. Why did you come?" The doctor swallowed, his throat tight. His eyes burned, not from the poisoned air but from the weight of the moment. He placed a gentle hand still gloved on her fragile shoulder. "Because you asked." The words spread quickly. Mothers wept. Elders bowed their heads. Even the suspicious leaders who had doubted that anyone would ever come could not hold back the tears that rolled down their faces. The first hours were filled with shock. Humans distributed water filters, showing how to use them. They handed out packets of food that expanded into meals with a little heat. They set up shelters with clean fabric, bright against the gray ruins. The aliens watched closely. Some were still afraid, whispering that the humans might demand obedience later. But others, especially the children, clung to the visitors, drawn to the warmth in their eyes. That night, when the red sky grew darker, a small campfire was lit. Humans and aliens sat together, though many could not yet understand each other's words. But laughter, small and hesitant, crossed the barrier. For the first time in years, the broken world heard something new, not just cries of despair, not just silence, but the sound of hope returning. The galaxy had ignored them. The powerful had turned away, but the humans had come, not because they wanted resources, not because they wanted power, but simply because someone had asked. And sometimes that was reason enough. At first, the arrival of humans felt like a miracle. The starving were given food, the thirsty were given clean water, and the sick were given medicine. Children laughed for the first time in years. Mothers whispered prayers of thanks. For a brief moment, the broken world felt alive again. But hope is fragile and fear is strong. Not everyone trusted the humans. Among the alien leaders, some looked at the visitors with narrowed eyes. To them, the humans were not saviors but opportunists. "Why have they come?" one elder demanded during a council meeting. "No one gives without asking in return. They must want something, our land, our labor, or even our obedience. Old wounds ran deep in this world. They had fought each other before, tribe against tribe, nation against nation. They had seen promises twisted into chains. And so suspicion grew. The humans felt it too. At night, whispers followed them. Some camps avoided their touch. Some leaders refused their gifts, saying, "Better to starve free than live as slaves." One evening, a fire broke out in a storage tent where humans had kept medicine. By the time they put out the flames, half the supplies were gone, reduced to ash. Later, they found that someone had stolen tools and hidden them away. The volunteers were hurt. They had come with open hearts only to be met with distrust. In the mess hall of their base, a young pilot slammed her fist against the table. "We bleed our hands for them and they repay us with this? Why are we even here?" The room went silent. Then an older engineer spoke softly. "Because they are afraid. Fear makes people strike before they understand. We cannot give up." So they stayed. The days turned into hard labor. The air was thick with poison, burning their throats as they worked in ruined fields. The soil was dead, but the humans knelt in it anyway, showing how to heal it with new seeds and simple machines. They built small greenhouses, teaching the aliens how to grow crops even in poisoned land. In the shattered cities, they used scrap metal to build shelters. They showed how broken walls could be reforged into homes. Children followed them, eyes wide, learning how to use hammers and nails, how to plant seeds in clean soil. But mistrust still lingered. Some aliens spat on the ground as humans passed. Some called them invaders in disguise. At night, the humans could hear angry speeches in the distance, voices warning the people not to trust outsiders. And yet, despite the fear, small cracks of trust appeared. One evening, a mother brought her sick son to the human camp. She knelt trembling as she begged for help. The human doctors treated the child, and when he opened his eyes, breathing steady again, the mother wept and whispered, "Thank you." Moments like this spread slowly, like sparks in the dark. Still, the weight was heavy. The humans were tired, coughing from the poisoned air. their hands raw from endless work. Some began to doubt themselves. Could they really save this world? Could kindness survive in a place where suspicion grew like weeds? One night, gathered around a dim fire, a young volunteer spoke. Maybe they're right. Maybe we're fools to be here. But the commander, a woman with silver in her hair and scars on her face, shook her head. No, we are not fools. We are teachers. And teaching takes time. We will not leave because of fear. We will stay until they see we came only to help. The words carried weight. They reminded the volunteers why they had left Earth, why they had crossed the endless dark. And slowly, very slowly, suspicion began to break. The stolen tools were returned in silence. A few leaders approached, asking questions about farming, about medicine. And in the eyes of the children, trust grew fastest. They no longer hid behind their parents, but ran openly to greet the humans each morning. The struggle was far from over. Fear still lived in many hearts, but humanity had not turned away. They had come because someone asked, and no amount of suspicion or struggle would drive them back. The seasons on the broken world passed slowly, marked not by beauty but by struggle. The sky remained dim and red, the air heavy with poison, and the land scarred from years of neglect. Yet beneath the gray clouds, something new began to stir. The first green shoots broke through the soil. They were small, fragile things, tiny plants grown in the makeshift greenhouses the humans had built from broken glass and salvaged metal. To the aliens, who had not seen green in years, the sight was almost unbelievable. They touched the leaves carefully as though afraid they might disappear like smoke. It is life, one human farmer explained, smiling through his exhaustion. If you feed it, care for it, it will grow. And so will you. Children gathered around the greenhouses every day, their eyes shining with curiosity. They watched the humans water the plants, teach the soil to breathe again, and explain how life could return even in poisoned ground. Slowly, the children began to copy them, planting seeds with their own small hands. Laughter returned in those moments, soft at first, like a forgotten melody, then louder, spreading through the ruined streets. For years, laughter had been absent, buried under hunger and fear. Now the sound rose again, echoing against collapsed walls like a promise of better days. Trust grew in other ways, too. The humans were no longer watched with the same suspicion. Where once the aliens kept their distance, now they sat with the visitors by firelight, listening to stories of Earth. One evening, a group of children asked a pilot to tell them about her home. She described rivers that sparkled in sunlight, mountains so tall their peaks touched the clouds, and oceans that smelled of salt and freedom. The children closed their eyes, imagining these things, and whispered, "One day, maybe our world will look like that again." The humans did not promise miracles. They knew recovery would take years, perhaps generations. But they did promise effort, and effort was something the broken people understood. In the cities, new shelters rose from ruins. Humans taught the survivors how to turn wreckage into homes, how to build roofs that held strong against the storms. The sound of hammers filled the air, and where silence once ruled, there was now the rhythm of work, of creation. In the camps, medicine flowed. Illness that once killed without mercy began to fade. Children who had been too weak to walk stood again. Mothers wept as they watched their sons and daughters play in the dusty streets, chasing each other with energy they thought lost forever. One elder, his face lined with both age and sorrow, spoke to the human commander. His voice shook as he said, "When we cried out, the stars ignored us. We thought we were abandoned, but then you came. You carried not only food and medicine, you carried hope. And that is heavier than all the gifts in your ships." The commander bowed her head. She answered softly, "Hope is not ours to keep. It is yours now. Carry it, share it, protect it." Songs returned too. In the evenings, survivors gathered in the ruined city squares. They sang not of victory, but of endurance. Their voices were weak, yet strong enough to fill the air with warmth. The humans joined them, clapping, humming, even teaching Earth's own songs of survival and love. For the first time in decades, the broken world did not feel like a tomb. It felt alive. Not whole, not healed, but alive. And though there were still whispers of doubt, still leaders who watched carefully, the people themselves began to believe. They believed not because the humans had solved every problem, but because the humans had not left. They stayed day after day through storms, through sickness, through mistrust. Hope was not in the green shoots, nor in the repaired shelters, nor in the medicines. Hope was in the simple truth that when they had cried into the void, someone had answered, and that answer had been human. News does not travel like light. It travels like fire, one spark then another until the flames cannot be contained. The story of humans answering the desperate plea spread far beyond the poisoned world. At first it was whispers among traders, then reports carried by wandering ships, and finally a tale repeated in the great halls of galactic power. The empires that had ignored the call now listened, but not with joy. Some listened with shame. They had heard the plea but turned away. Now they watched as humanity, small and fragile by galactic standards, gave without demand. The sight of it was a mirror, and they did not like what it showed. Others listened with confusion. Why would they waste resources? They asked. What do they gain from this? No tribute, no territory, no wealth. It makes no sense, and some listened with fear. For to them, a species that chose kindness over conquest was dangerous in a way they could not understand. Power built on fear could be fought. Power built on greed could be bargained with. But power built on compassion, that was unpredictable. That could inspire others. Across the galaxy, arguments began. In council chambers, delegates whispered, "If humans can do this, what will others expect from us?" In back rooms, rulers clenched their fists. If they win hearts, they may not need to win wars. But to the humans themselves, none of this mattered. They did not measure their success in reputation or fear. They measured it in smaller things, in a child's laughter, in the first harvest from soil that had been dead, in the quiet relief of a mother holding medicine for her sick son, in the alien elder who whispered, "You gave us more than food. You gave us tomorrow." These were the victories that mattered. Not fame, not power, but lives changed, lives saved, hope reborn. One night in the camp, the volunteers gathered under the dim sky. A young pilot looked up at the stars and said softly, "Do you think the others are watching us?" The commander sitting nearby nodded. "Yes, they are watching. Some with envy, some with fear, some with doubt. But they are watching. Does it matter?" the pilot asked. The commander smiled faintly. "Not to us. We did not come for them. We came for the ones who called. And that is enough." The words carried a weight, a quiet strength that the volunteers felt deep in their bones. They had not crossed the stars for glory. They had not risked their lives for recognition. They had come because someone had asked, and they could not ignore that. Still, the ripple spread. On distant worlds, common people heard the story and felt something stir in their hearts. They asked their leaders, "Why did we not help? Why did we stay silent?" And though the leaders gave excuses, the people remembered the humans who had not turned away. On some planets, statues were raised, not of warriors or conquerors, but of humans carrying water, medicine, and seeds. On others, songs were sung about the day when kindness crossed the stars. And on the broken world itself, the people no longer felt alone. They began to walk with straighter backs, to speak with stronger voices. Not because their planet was healed. It was still scarred, still struggling, but because they now knew they were not forgotten. The galaxy had tried to teach them that weakness was a crime, that pleas for help were worthless. But humanity had taught them something different, that mercy was strength and answering a cry was never a waste. The ripple moved onward, touching hearts across the stars. Some resisted it, some feared it, but some began to dream. And all of it began with a single truth. When the galaxy turned away, humans chose to step forward. The work had taken months. The land was not fully healed, but green shoots now pushed through the poisoned soil. The rivers still carried scars, yet fish had returned to some of the streams. The air was cleaner, the skies less heavy. For the first time in many years, the people of the broken world could look ahead and see more than despair. They could see tomorrow. The human volunteers prepared to leave. Their ships stood ready on the plains, silver and worn from use. Some of the local children gathered near them, clutching simple gifts, woven cloth, carved stones, and pieces of fruit. They had little to give, but they gave anyway. One old woman approached the commander, her eyes wet with tears. She pressed her hands together and whispered, "We called into the dark. We thought no one would hear. But you heard, you came. You saved us." The commander shook his head gently. "We did not save you. You saved yourselves. We only helped you remember how." The woman's tears fell freely, but her smile was bright. She bowed, and the people around her bowed too, not out of duty but out of gratitude. When the humans boarded their ships, the crowd watched in silence. Engines rumbled, dust rose. The vessels lifted into the sky, leaving trails of light. The people waved, their voices rising in one final cheer that echoed across the valley. From orbit, the commander looked down at the planet. Its surface was still scarred, still far from whole, but it was alive again. That was enough. He whispered to himself, "This is why we came." Far across the galaxy, the story grew stronger. The great powers tried to silence it, but stories cannot be chained. Merchants repeated it in spaceports. Pilgrims carried it between stars. Farmers told it beside their fields. Children whispered it to each other at night. The humans came. The humans answered when no one else would, and in those whispers a change began. Small at first, like the green shoots on poisoned soil. Some worlds began to question their rulers. Others started to dream of helping as the humans had helped. The empires grew uneasy. They had weapons, fleets, entire systems under their control. But they could not stop a story. They could not stop hope. On Earth, the volunteers returned home. They were not greeted as heroes. There were no parades, no medals, no fanfare. They walked back into ordinary lives carrying only memories. One young pilot sat in her small apartment staring at the night sky. She thought of the children who had given her fruit, the old man who had hugged her, the fields they had replanted together. No camera had captured those moments. No history book might record them. But they were real. They mattered. She whispered softly, "I hope they remember us." They did. Years passed. The planet healed more and more. Forests returned. Rivers cleared. Generations grew up knowing the story of the day the humans came, and they never forgot. They built schools and carved into their walls, "Mercy is strength." They wrote songs that told of voices in the dark and the strangers who became friends. They planted gardens in the shape of stars to honor the visitors who had answered their plea. And when those children grew old and told the tale to their own children, they did not speak only of survival. They spoke of kindness. They spoke of hope. They spoke of humanity. Centuries later, when the galaxy faced new storms, new wars, and new darkness, the memory of that one act endured. It became a beacon, passed from voice to voice, world to world. For in the vast silence of space, where so many chose to turn away, one species had chosen to listen, and when the stars remembered, they did not remember the powerful fleets or the endless empires. They remembered the humans, the ones who heard a cry for help, the ones who came, the ones who stayed long enough to give hope, and in the endless night that memory burned brighter than any star.